And welcome along to episode 3 of the Simbox Presents Let's Talk Boxing podcast. As always, I'm your host, Luke from Simbox. Delighted as always to be joined by my co-host, Jamie. And Jamie, what a whirlwind weekend of action. Some of the outcomes of the fights were akin to Hollywood movie scripts, and some maybe even beyond movie scripts, with Fabio Wardley's stunning knockout, Callum Simpson claiming European title glory. Josh Kelly was victorious. What a stunning, exciting weekend of boxing.
Oh, we had everything this weekend. We had drama, Hollywood stories, controversy, stunning knockouts. It had everything, and I think our previews from the last podcast we were probably quite wide off in terms of how some of it went down. But yeah, exciting and a lot for us to talk about and get stuck right into.
Yeah, of course. So no better place to start than Portman Road, Ipswich, the hometown hero Fabio Wardley going in with semi-late replacement Justice Huni. I think he had 5 or 6 weeks notice, stepping in for Jarrell Miller. Now, when we say about Hollywood movie scripts, if we use to build up how this fight, even before they stepped into the ring, played out, it just sounded like a Hollywood movie script. 20,000 fans at his hometown football stadium in the pouring down rain. They're all there with the ponchos on, and he gets in there against this relatively unknown beast of a fighter. Just as only, even in defeat, far superseded what I thought he was capable of on the night. He put on an absolute boxing clinic, and then to see that knockout in round 10, one punch knockout. Fabio Wardley done it again and again, but even though we said
Yeah.
he'd be behind on the cards, I think that might have been my prediction that he was behind on the cards and he'd get the knockout. But he was so far behind on the cards, and he's done it again. Absolutely stunning, Jamie.
Yeah.
What do you make of it?
It was, well, we spoke about the Deontay Wilder comparison there, and it literally was. It was, you can outbox me, but I only need to land once, and that was it. It was one shot, and like you said, it was a boxing clinic from Huni. I kind of had a feeling that like he had that in his locker with the experience he had, but obviously we backed Wardley to get the KO. I think we both might have said that it was going to be towards a later stoppage, and yeah, he come up with that detonating right hand, and it closed the show in a fight that it looked like he had at one point. It didn't look like he had any chance of winning it. It was all Hunter. I think he won maybe 2 rounds on one of the judges' scorecards or overall, if I can remember rightly. So and yeah, but unfortunate for Honey stepping in 5 weeks, but I think it's probably boosted his profile massively as well. I think it's actually, when we said last time about risk and reward, it was all reward for Honey, even in defeat.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, me and myself and Jamie was down at Oakwell in Barnsley for the Callum Simpson Ivan Zuko fight. And I think you'd be in the same boat as me, Jamie. I was coming out of the stadium and there wasn't great reception there at Barnsley, and you was filtering through notifications from friends and from social media about what was happening in Portman Road. And I just didn't expect it because we didn't have any updates during the night. We weren't able to access the internet or whatnot inside Oakwell. I thought I was just going to get out and it'd be like, oh yeah, Fabio Wardley gets a job done in 3, or Fabio Wardley gets a job done in 5. And
Yeah,
as I seen the notifications filtering through, it was like he's been completely outboxed. And even reading through those notifications and some headlines, because I wanted to watch it back on DAZN the next day, and even though reading through those notifications and getting a rough idea of what's gone on, I still watched the fight and was like, how is Justice Sonny not going to win this fight? How's he not going to stop him? Because there was some serious moments there. I know Wardley had his moment at the end of the first, and then he had a bit of a moment in the third. But there was serious moments there where Justice Sonny was laying a beating on him. The combinations, the hand speed, the footwork.
yeah,
Fabio Wardley looked lost. He looked heartbroken at times.
yeah,
Huddled. There was certain points in that fight where I thought, I'm never going to label Fabio Wardley a quitter. I'll never really label any fighter a quitter. But he looked like he could quit out of sheer frustration, not out of being hurt or being scared or being worried about being knocked out, but from sheer frustration because he just didn't look like he had an answer for anything that Justice Sonny was throwing at him. And I say a punch from the gods. I mean that respectfully. There was no look about it. He slipped to his left. The overhand right came over, and he caught Justice Sonny with square feet. Probably the only time in the fight that Justice Sonny made that kind of mistake.
yeah.
And
You,
that's all she wrote.
yeah, yeah, and that can happen in very boxing. Obviously it's 10th round, bit tired. A little bit of it was more of a mistake on Honey's part. It was a good shot from Wardley, but like you said, gone square foot, gone squared up. Uh, Bit lazy with with what he did, and he paid the price. But I also think that came with a lot of controversy as well. There's one of the things, obviously, like you said, we couldn't get notifications when my notification was coming through. All I was getting was like I seen robbery and seeing, oh, that wasn't a 10 count, that wasn't a 10 count, it's fixed. And I was like, "What?" So, and then obviously watching it back, there could be an argument that it may have been slightly fast of a count.
Yeah, I think again, there's always been this thing about the 10 counts with the referee, and some people think, is it 10 seconds? Is it at the ref's discretion? Because with the Tyson Fury, a couple of times they thought that he could have been counted out against Wilder, especially in that first fight, and that he was down longer than 10 seconds, and then it's a ref's count, not necessarily 10 seconds in general. It's certainly an argument to be made if you're in Honey's camp, but I think for me, there was no real argument from Justice Honey on in the immediate aftermath. So for me, I think if he felt hard done by, or if he felt like once he got to his feet, he was in a position to carry on, then maybe he's just a respectful character and he's not going to downplay Fabio Wardley's victory. But maybe for me, if
Yeah,
he felt like he was in a position to carry on there, that there should have been more of a fight to continue, or some disgust at the fact that the fight was waved off when it was. But he seemed very accepting of the stoppage, and it seems to be his team in the aftermath. Maybe they're chasing the rematch. You've seen how well Justice Honey done
yeah,
there, and that in a rematch he could do it again, and maybe he puts the exclamation mark on the victory before it gets to that point. So yeah, I can see where the argument's being made, but I can see more why it's being made. I think it's more from his team pushing for a potential rematch, or maybe to get some kind of controversy going that draws eyes to Justice Sunday, because he's going to be a big commodity in that heavyweight division moving forward. But
yeah, of
for
course.
me, I think if had he got up and the ref allowed him to go on, Wardley is a fantastic finisher.
That killer in it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he doesn't miss, and he throws heavy shots. That adrenaline, 20,000 fans had jumped to their feet in sheer amazement. Their hopes and their prayers had been answered. He would have flew at Justice Sunday, and he could have really done some damage. So at that point, then we'd be saying, why is the referee let him continue? So it's such a tightrope that these refs have to walk in it. So again, I'm not saying
yes.
it was a fast count. I'm not saying it was a slow count. I can see there's a controversy, but I can kind of understand where the refs come from.
Yeah. He didn't look too great as he actually got up to be. I had it about. Sounds stupid to say this, but 9.5. As he fully stood up, I had it. I was just going to 10. As he's fully stood up like that, I probably just got to 10 at that point. And yeah, there's an argument, but you're probably right in the sense of if the ref had gone right, carry on, it probably would have been game over anyway.
Yeah, I think for me, the ref might have seen something in his eyes, because you've got to say on that performance, he was so far ahead that had it been the other way around, you'd be screaming all day long for Fabio Wardley to be allowed to continue.
Yeah,
Let's play roles reverse, and that Fabio Wardley just dominated this fight for 8 of the 10 rounds the way that Justice Honey had done. And then Honey lands this monster blow, puts Wardley down. I can guarantee you at that point, and I can guarantee you, no matter what looks in Wardley's eyes, the referee lets that fight continue there, because
yeah.
he's the home
That's yeah
fighter.
for
I
home
guess that's the
fight.
cut of
Yeah.
the green that comes with a home advantage. One thing that I would have been interested to be, Jamie, imagine us being squished in the middle there in between Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn with a little camera for Simbox, and listening to their little arguments going on, going on, because Eddie Hearn must have been getting so smug. Spencer Brown there as well, the manager or part of the team of
Oh
just
yeah,
Frank was there, and you could see as he was looking up to the ring, he knew it weren't going right. He even went over to the corner, didn't he, Fabio Wardley? I think it was the end of round 9. He must have
yeah.
shed some words of wisdom, because obviously he goes out and gets the next round. But yeah, to be in between those two throughout that fight, Eddie must have been getting real smug because his fight was so far ahead, and then for it all to turn upside down the way it did, that would have been some fantastic content.
Frank Warren's just got his number, baby.
He was there, wasn't he, with that long black coat on, his suit. He just looks like the godfather of boxing at the minute, and he was written off so many times, and
Yeah,
he's come back, and he's come back with a vengeance. And I always thought Eddie Hearn was so far ahead that when he had the golden era of the George Groves and Carl Froch fights, leading on to Anthony Joshua's come out party with Klitschko and Tony Bellew at Goodison Park, and many other world title fights and world champions for Matchroom. It seemed that he was leaving Frank Warren in his rear view. But Frank, over these past
yeah,
years, obviously, of course, the 5 versus 5, gets all the plaudits. But there's other fights like this one with Fabio Wardley where he's just getting little victories over Eddie Hearn and they're building into massive victories. And you see the graphic that Queensbury put out today with the heavyweight division and how many names he's got. When has
Yeah,
Hearn
yeah.
ever been scrambling for heavyweight fighters? You look now and you think, there's Anthony Joshua, Johnny Fisher's just been knocked out by Dave Allen, so they signed Dave Allen. Whereas on the other side of the street with Queensbury, you're looking
Everyone.
every kind of level. You've got Dillian White there that's been around for a little while, been at the top of the game. You've got Moses Talman, the most exciting name in the heavyweight
Oh,
division.
yeah, yeah.
Lawrence Okola, he's moved up into the heavyweight division. There's names that I missed. David Adelaide, British champion. Frank Warren's running the game at heavyweight boxing. It's unbelievable. And like I say, just a few short years ago, not many people would have thought it'd turn out this way.
Yeah, of course, of course.
So obviously, all eyes will turn to what's next for Fabio Wardley. He's on such a high now. Frank says he's going to sit out and look to see what goes down July 19th, which a lot of the heavyweight division will look to do now when Alexander Usyk defends his unified world titles against IBF world champion Daniel Dubois. Will crown another undisputed champion, which is great for the sport, having the number one in the division. But with that comes mandatory challenges, and that's where we might see the belts
Yeah.
fragment. So where do we see Fabio Wardley fitting in to those plans? With he's the interim WBA regular champion for what that's worth, but what he does do is put him in line for a world title shot down the line. What do we see next for Fabio Wardley? He's not going to really tread water, is he? He's not going to wait around.
Yeah, it's he's again. I think he's sort of in a bit of limbo now because he's ranked number one with the WBA. Obviously, they've got their interim, which is Pulev. Um, so I can't see him take. He's probably going to wait and try and see if he can get the fight with the winner of Usyk and Dubois, but I can't see that happening because I think Parker's going to be in line to fight the winner of that. So I can't see him taking a hard fight that's going to jeopardize that position. I was I was thinking maybe the winner of Pulev and Michael Hunter, which has been I think it's for August that, but
Yep.
because it's so far away, you're talking then maybe sort of October, maybe even November time when he gets to fight the winner of that, and then that means he's going to be out the ring for close to 6 months. So it's a bit of a thing. Like Frank said, he's probably going to sit out. I think the next step is he can't go any further back. He's now got to step up as trying to fight for a world title. But which way does he go? I'm sort of unsure of, and it's all depends on July 19th. If Usyk wins, he might retire, and then that opens up all the belts. So, which if it does, do you know what? I wouldn't mind seeing him fight Lawrence Okola. In the meantime, while he waits to see what happens with the world titles, I think that would be a great British dust up. And he's obviously friends with Dillian White, and Coley and White have got that beef. I think that could be a good little storyline and a nice little British dust up, and one that he could probably win. In fact, I think he probably would beat Okola, and so maybe get that on in the meantime and wait to see what happens with the world titles.
Well, us, Jamie, and by us, I mean me, yourself, British boxing fans. We love a storyline. We love selling fights on the storyline. And for me, I think logically, I would look at the winner of that Pulev Michael Hunter fight because I think when you're looking at where that a win over one of those two would take him, there'd be no discretions about if he is next in line for a WBA world title shot or is he not. He'd clean that up and he'd be clear number one with the WBA. And I think both men, with all due respect to Kubrat Pulev and Michael Hunter, are both winnable fights for Fabio Wardley. I think the Lawrence Okolie is a great shout, and mine's along the same kind of lines, although at different stages of the career. But Fabio Wardley being managed by Dillian White, that bad blood there with Derek Chisora. We've seen now Dillian White is looking likely to face Moses Atalma. So what about Fabio Wardley against Derek Chisora? That was a fight. I think Derek Chisora put a graphic out on Twitter, and Fabio Wardley actually replied to it, and I thought, does that fight make sense? It'd certainly sell.
Yeah, yeah,
Sure is talking about waiting in line to get a world title shot, and maybe he's looking at a name slightly bigger than Fabio Wardley, but how much bigger are you going to get than a guy that's just sold out 20,000 tickets in his hometown stadium in the piss rain and won in dramatic fashion? The name Fabio
yeah.
Wardley
Of course.
is on the lips of all British boxing fans at the minute. So I think that'd be
Yeah,
my
yeah,
field option. Derek Chisora is looking to go out in a blaze of glory. How better would it be than for him to go down to Portman Road and potentially upset the hometown hero in front of another 20,000 fans That'd certainly get him the payday he'd be craving. And like I say, he's talking about being in line for this IBF mandatory shot, but we don't know when that's going to be called. Father Time doesn't wait for any man, and Derek Chisora surely, he's got this one fight left. I think that could be the one.
Yeah, it's not. It's you know what? It's a great shout actually. I didn't even really think about Chisora. And to be fair, Chisora being number one at the IBF, it puts him. It probably even strengthens him because he'll go number one at IBF and number one at WBA as well.
Yeah, of course. And one of the things that is not going to get mentioned here, but again, in a world of rematches and rematch clauses, had things been different, you'd certainly be screaming for a rematch if he was in Justice Honey's corner. Obviously, there's going to be no obligation for Wardley to give him that rematch. But when a fight's that competitive and it's won by knockout from somebody so far behind on the cards, if this was Fabio Wardley again in Justice Honey's shoes, we'd be screaming for a rematch. And I'd certainly not say no to watching that again because it'd be really interesting to see, can Honey close the fight out quicker? Can Wardley change anything
Yeah.
to not be outboxed to the level that he was? So I think there's certainly legs in a rematch. Hopefully, one or even both of them could pick up world titles if they do fragment, and then that'd be a massive rematch further down the line.
In terms of potential rematch, obviously, like you said, Honey's going to push for that, but I don't think it will happen because I don't think they would want to risk that again. Like you said, it would open up a lot of questions to how would Wardley deal with it. How would Honey close the show early? But I just think it won't happen. I think they'll just look to aim to go for that world title opportunity in the bigger fights, and but it doesn't mean anything for Honey because I think he could easily step into a big fight next himself on the back of that performance. So it's I think both are on the up, but even though he's lost, both fighters are actually going to be on the up from that performance.
Yeah, it just goes to show how healthy this heavyweight division is, isn't it? When we say about fighters that can learn and grow in defeat, just as Sonny was, I wouldn't say a nobody. He was a nobody to your casual fan. He'd got himself up to number one in the WBO with his 12 wins, undefeated record going into Saturday night. And it just goes to show that these guys jostling for position. That if you take that risk and you go in with, another guy around your kind of level, and you put up a good performance, you're not going to be written off. The Lawrence Okolo we've already mentioned, Zhilei Zhang, is he going to fight again? Ajit Kabayel. There's so many names, Moses Atama, Dillian White going to get it on. You go in there, you put on a show. There's plenty of big fights in that division, and although we're saying everyone's going to wait for July 19th, and for that to play out and see who's going to be world champion and if the belt's going to fragment, these guys fighting each other in the meantime are going to do him no harm, because there's big paydays there for them to have, whether it be on domestic shows with Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn or whether it be on one of these Riyadh season cards. It just goes to show that, with all due respect to Vladimir and Vitaly Klitschko, when they had that heavyweight division on lock, there was nothing like this kind of competition. It was good, solid fighters, but there was nothing like the marketability and the 50-50 matchups that we're seeing in this current era. So it's almost like a flashback to eras gone by of the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, where we're getting good, solid fights just below world level.
Yeah, of course. And I think it's only going to start growing with, especially the emergence of some of the top prospects that are coming through as well. I think the heavyweight scene is going to really open up, and especially once Usyk's gone as well. Obviously, I think it's going to open up massively, and there's going to be a lot of contenders and a lot of 50-50 fights where we're not going to be able to call them, and we're going to look back and think, what an era, because we've not had a strong era like this, and hopefully these top prospects come through, and we've got a lot of upsets and a lot of big fights to come forward.
Absolutely. So let's shift from one big stadium show to another on Saturday night. As I said earlier, myself and Jamie was down there. We was in the house at Oakwell in a chilly Barnsley, but a vibrant, a buzzing town for Callum Simpson, undefeated, going in against fellow undefeated super middleweight Ivan Zuko with the European title on the line. Jamie, just heading down to the stadium. I know you made your journey separate to myself, but as soon as you arrived, you just had a buzz wanting in the air. There was just a feel that you knew something was going on, that you could see like groups of people walking towards the stadium, and
Yeah,
I didn't know where I was going. As soon as we parked the car up, I was just like, follow the crowd, just find a group of people. I know you were like, yeah, Callum in this round, Callum in that round. He's gonna get the title, this, that, and the other. It just had a real big fight feel to it, and
yeah, it did.
I
It was electric. The atmosphere. There was a lot of people. It was weird. It felt like you were going to a big football match, but it was a big boxing event. and it was like so many people there. And the mad thing was, do you know, like this, when they say about, oh, let's get the stadium rocking, at times you could feel that stadium rocking as well. What a great set of fans that he's got, and what a, diehard loyal fans that he's got, because obviously the fight at times didn't go too well for him, but they stuck behind him, they cheered him on, and I've not seen a lot of, not been live in person, I've seen a hometown fighter get that sort of attention and atmosphere from the locals.
Yeah, of course. And just to go to show how partisan they are, how aggressive they are on the undercard, Mark Jeffers, who's a stablemate of Callum Simpson, they're both managed by Kevin Marie, of course. He was fighting Sean Hemphill. We obviously was there for that fight. We really enjoyed that fight as well. You know, anyone that didn't watch the co-main event, make sure you go and check that out. Really good fight, and massive congrats to Sean Hemphill coming over from the States and upsetting Mark Jeffers. But how many times did we turn to each other? And of course, there was some unsavoury action in the crowd, couple of scraps. But that was the Yorkshire fans cheering for Sean Hemphill because they know Mark Jeffers has
Yeah.
been calling out Callum Simpson. So they're all for his opponent. That's how partisan they are, how passionate they are about their guy. They even took the time out. There's USA, USA chants going.
USA, USA,
Yeah,
yeah.
how crazy was that? At one point, I was looking around like,
Yeah.
not sold that many tickets. Surely Sean Hemphill, with all due respect, has not brought a legion of fans over to Barnsley from New Orleans. It was nuts, wasn't it? And that was just as good as atmosphere because he was cheering for Mark Jeffers to get beat. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? When he did lose as well, it was as if Callum Simpson had won with how they cheered it, which was a bit unfortunate because he is a UK fighter, but with him calling out Callum Simpson, and we spoke about that they could potentially fight after this. They were probably like in your face kind of, attitude, but commiserations to Mark Jeffers. Just didn't do enough on the night. He just looked like he didn't have the. He sort of like, I don't know. I won't say he ran out of ideas, but he just very one dimensional in his approach to the opponent. And fair play, because I know we didn't score that fight, but throughout it, we did keep saying, "Oh, he's looking good. He's looking good." The American, and even when it ended, I think we were both at the point where he might have got this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in slight defense of Mark Jeffers, because I don't want to undermine Sean Hemphill's victory because he was well deserving, as you've said. But it kind of felt to me, and again, I know it's at different levels and they're both chasing different things. But with Jack Catterall, when he had those victories over Jorge Linares and Josh Taylor, and then you kept thinking, right, after this one, it's a world title fight. After this one, it's a world title fight. Whereas with Mark Jeffers, he knows the big fight at this stage of his career is Callum Simpson. And he's went out last time. He's got the win. The fight before that, and he might have been thinking, yeah, I'm going to get Callum next. I'm going to get Callum next. They both beat Zach Jelly. They both keep beating the same kind of level of oppositions. Then Jack Catterall goes in with Arnold Barboza, and it just felt like one fight too many. That might also be the case here with Mark Jeffers, that it was just one fight too many before the big, for Jack Catterall, the big come up was the world title fight that he was hoping to get. And for Mark Jeffers, he might have been hoping to be the one that helps sell out Oakwell to fight Callum Simpson. And that it was just one fight too many for him to get up for and be like, right, this is it now. And I'm not saying that is the reasoning, but I can kind of see that kind of logic. Does that make sense? That the
Yeah, it does in a
carrot,
way, but
carrot was dangled one too many times almost like the carrot was being dangled one too many times and
yeah,
not
like he
motivate
absolutely.
himself.
Yeah, of course, I get that. But I think, as a fighter, I don't think he would shy away from any fights. And I think for him, it was a case of, yeah, I'll go in there in his backyard and I'll show him who the boss is, and I'll make him have to fight me next. And like you said, maybe it was just a fight too far. But Callum Simpson was just slightly ahead in terms of where they were going up the rankings wise, just because he's backed a lot heavily. And he's got the backing of the crowd and the backing of boxer.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about with Fabio Wardley of these fights that look like Hollywood scripts. You know, Look at Callum Simpson. We had all the razzmatazz, the ring entrance, fantastic ring entrance, ring walk. The crowd were going nuts. Like you say, you could feel the ground shaking at times. He gets in there, and you're like, oh my God, like we sat there nudging each other, like it's going down. And then boom, 8 seconds in, he's on the canvas, and you just
Yeah,
it's almost like they're building up to it. And it was a flash knockdown. You called it straight away. He was like, he's not hurt him.
Yeah.
He's straight up back on his feet, but you just couldn't make it up. If anything, I said to the missus, I was like, let's back him here inside 3 rounds. I thought he was gonna feed off the atmosphere and he's gonna charge at Ivan Zuko here and be full of beans. And if anything, it had the complete opposite effect. And fair play to
Yeah.
Ivan
Well,
Zuko.
well, in a way, he did
Straight well,
kind of
didn't
charge at him and then got clipped, didn't he? Do you know?
he?
He did rush at him and he paid the price. But like you said, I straight away, obviously I stood up, head in my hands, like, oh, flash knockdown, flash knockdown, flash knockdown. He's not hurt, he's not. And, it was a flash knockdown, and you could even argue, the second knockdown. You could have argued for a slip on that one. But yeah, the script was totally flipped at one point. You had the 7 seconds in, boom, flash knockdown. And even though I think he still won the first round, the problem he had then was he went down again to, another flash knockdown slash slip. And that would have easily put him quite behind on the cards. And it was a case of, I think me and you at the time were quite itchy bum time. Like, we don't know what's gonna happen because Zuko actually had his moments himself, sort of in the middle rounds as well. The weird thing was the rounds where he had the knockdowns, he didn't look great. Like Simpson won them rounds, but the rounds sort of in the middle, I thought he won. He definitely nicked a couple of them middle rounds, and it were really really tight moments. And again, leading back to Wardley and Hollywood moment himself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for Zuko, I think if there was one criticism, and I mean slight criticism, because he played his part in that fight, we said again watching it that he's not necessarily the quickest. That you can kind of see his punches coming. But one thing that he did do, he answered everything that Callum Simpson threw at him, and his timing was perfect. Obviously, he scored those two knockdowns, but it was like if he might kick himself watching that back. That he could have shown a bit more ambition in terms of he was reactive rather than proactive, if that makes sense. He seemed to be answering Callum Simpson,
Yeah, yeah,
posing the questions, and ultimately that's what caused his downfall. He gets backed into the corner in round 10 as he was throughout the fight. There was times where Callum Simpson was really looking to unload, and when he did in that 10th round, and I'm going to take my flowers here. In the first round, I said, "She, the uppercut here is going to be the answer," and maybe it took him 10
yeah.
rounds to hear me from the bleachers. Land that uppercut, but when he landed, he landed his fair share in that 10th round, and yeah, that was all she wrote. Callum Simpson wins the European super middleweight title, and for me, that was a breakout fight in terms of the storyline of the fight, the tragedy which we mentioned last week that he's overcome out of the ring. He's got a special place in Barnsley hearts, but also nationwide now. I think he's really announced himself as a serious contender, and when we see fighters go through this kind of jeopardy in the ring where they're down and they fight with the heart and the sleeves, it really endears himself to us British fans. I don't think there's any set of fans like us that it almost makes the fighter feel more real, doesn't it? That they can go in there
Yeah, yeah,
and overcome this kind of adversity. So I thought, I turned to you and I said to a friend of mine afterwards, I said, that's a megastar born there for me.
yeah, yeah. He could that the way it ended, especially with the story behind him. Anyway, with his the sister and the tragedy and whatnot, and he's just a nice bloke. And he had to dig deep, and he had to answer Zuko's questions, which he answered magnificently in round 9. And yeah, you've just got to take your hats off, like you said. A star could be born here now, and I think next time they'll be looking to sell out Barnsley fully, because I think I think one of the stands, two of the stands weren't actually open for the event, and they're talking for the next one, having it fully, and you're talking over 20,000 fans, which they will all pile in, and I think not just Barnsley locals, I think the people will travel like we did to come and watch him, and yeah, it's exciting times for him.
Of course, so again, we spoke about what might be next for Fabio Wardley. It'll only be right to speak about what's next for Callum Simpson. Now, for me, he was looking at, we praised him for going the traditional route of winning British, Commonwealth, area titles, now the European title. He was looking at potential world title fights in 2026, and I think although as great a victory as it was on Saturday night, it did show his vulnerabilities and that there is still learning for Callum Simpson to do. Of course, he's only had 18 fights now. What would you think is a logical fight for him next? For me, I know it's not, it won't be classed as a defense of that European title, but why not go in there with Sean Hemphill, get him back over? He was game as a badger against Mark Jeffers, and I don't know if it'd mean that he'd have to vacate that European title or they'd allow him a separate fight and come back to the European title.
Yeah.
Put him in there with Sean Hemphill. I
You know
think
what? I
great
think
fight.
Yeah, I think that's the fight. I think, do you know what? That's probably the fight to make because bang on with your assessment is not that's shown that he wasn't quite ready for world level. And the reason why I also say he's not ready for world level was, us watching it and you calling it in the first round, the uppercut was on from round one. And I think not being able to do that, it weren't like Zuko wasn't showing him that the uppercut was there. I think the fact that it took him so long to actually unload it properly and use it effectively, which he should have done from round one onwards, kind of made me think, yeah, you're not quite ready because if you were on the world level, you would have seen that shot earlier, if that makes sense. You would have seen that and detonated it a lot earlier and found a home for it earlier. But that's no disrespect to Callum. I just think, like you said, he's just not quite on that world level. And the two knockdowns, especially the first one, was very very amateurish in a way, without being disrespectful to him. It was an amateurish way to go down in that first round. Um, but I think that's the fight to make because he's just beat Jeffers, who we wanted him to fight next, and it gives him another opportunity to fight at Barnes because I'm sure he'll come back over for that, and it will give us an opportunity to see where he's at because I thought Sean was a nice operator in there, moved well, worked well, had uh, different phases of attacks, different combinations that he let go. He were, doing the same thing over and over again, and he made Mark Jeffers think and work. And I think that's what Callum Simpson needs as he builds up to that world level. Yeah,
Yeah, so we look forward to seeing what's next for Callum Simpson. What a great night it was on Saturday. And shout out to both guys as well the day after going for a bit of food. That was always great to see that they went to war on Saturday night and then shared a meal on the Sunday with their wives. Friday night, a fight that might have went under the radar. We spoke about it a little last weekend. Josh Pretty Boy Kelly goes in there, gets a one-round demolition over Flavius Beer. We didn't know what to expect. I think I was saying it could have gone late, that Flavius Beer might have had a bit about him. In the end, a double left hook from Josh Kelly was enough to get the job done, and he's victorious. And now he's targeting those bigger fights at 154 and maybe 160, who knows. But what did you make of Josh Pretty Boy Kelly, Jamie?
well, obviously I thought he would probably go the distance because, like you said, didn't really know much about the opponent. But I also did say that he needs to start pushing on and he needs to make a statement. And obviously, he made a statement in the fact that he knocked him out two left hooks, knocked him out, got the first round KO. But at the same time, doesn't really give us any indication to where Josh Kelly is currently at. It didn't answer any questions, um, but it did give him a highlight reel knockout. In terms of where he goes from there at 154 and 160, I don't really know. He's not. I don't think that fight makes you go right. Yeah, world title opportunity or a number one contender opportunity. It was they weren't really much to go off.
No, I agree, and I think it come to me today when I was actually thinking and putting notes together for the podcast that the idea that he was going to have this fight against Flavius B, with all due respect to Flavius, that he was going to go into this and this was going to be a stepping stone into a world title fight. It kind of gave me thoughts of Anthony Yard, the way he used to go from unknown territory, these guys without great records, and if they did have a great record, it was very padded. And then all of a sudden he's jumping up and he's fighting Kovalev, and then he's coming back down, and then he had the loss with Lyndon Arthur, and he beat Lyndon Arthur, and then he's back up again, and he's fighting Arthur Peterbiev, and after that he's coming down and he's fighting these unknown away fighters, and of course he beat Lyndon Arthur again, so that was a good win. But that kind of fluctuation between here and here, there's not that gradual building process that we're saying somebody like a Callum Simpson is doing. I think for Josh Kelly, I don't think that that's the right preparation to go and call, some serious operators at that 154 division. We got Fandora and Tizu fighting in July, so they're going to be wrapped up. You got the IBF world champion, but I think he needs another stepping stone. I'm not quite sure the European champion is at 154, but maybe you should have a look at that kind of level, then jump up to the world team because stepping from here to here is a massive jump, and we've seen before when he stepped up too quick and he got took out by David Evnisian. So for me, I think there's a couple more fights in there before he really launches himself into that world team. But we said last week, he's 31 now. He's not this kid anymore. Despite his boyish
Yeah,
looks,
okay.
he's not a kid anymore. So I think
Yeah.
it poses just as much questions in victory as it did beforehand. So yeah, we'll wait to see what happens with Josh Pretty Boy Kelly. Jamie, as always, the episode flies past. I really appreciate your time again joining me on the podcast this week. I appreciate all our viewers. Make sure you leave us a like, a subscribe, a comment on the YouTube channel. We will be looking to bring the podcast back to Spotify and to Apple Podcasts soon as well, so keep your eyes out for that. But Jamie, another great weekend of boxing. We haven't got too much to look forward to on the domestic scene this week. We've got George Kambosos challenging for the IBF Super Lightweight World Title with Richardson Hitchens, so that's a good fight to watch. It'll be on the early hours. But I'm sure I'll catch up with you on next week's podcast.
Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about.